I'm Alec Bangler. Thanks, Sean, for inviting me. I'm going to share the screen in a second. But just to introduce myself, I teach mostly intro studios and visualization classes at Penn State now. I still do a little practice work on the side. I came from to Penn State most recently from working at Michael Van Valkenburg Associates. So my role is sort of as a generalist and teaching design fundamentals and hopefully staying connected enough to practice to have that be a amenity for the students. So let me share my screen and I'm gonna go full screen here. And yeah, Sean, I'll just trust you if there's any technical thing or people can't hear. I'll keep an eye on the chat. Okay, full screen. So yeah, I was just telling Sean, we saw each other at the CELA conference in St. Louis last week. This is a version of a talk I gave. And let's see, can you see the screen without the Zoom controls or?
Yeah, we just got the big orange square.
Okay, good. Good. I have them on my screen, but I'll ignore it. Okay, so yeah, this is a talk that I gave at the CELA conference, and I was just saying that it was originally designed as a 45-minute lecture that I did not pare down enough for the 12 minutes that we had. So I'm really happy to have the chance to present it again when I have a little more time and I'm not rushing through it. So um, as I said, I come from practice and working in a firm that does kind of everything across the board, small to big to public to private. And so you all might find yourselves in this position someday where you're making a transition from practice to academia, and there's some expectations and some great opportunities to kind of develop an agenda and figure out what your role is as an academic and kind of what you do. But that can be also, yeah, a little hard for people who come from practice and um, to sort of find that niche, especially when you're used to not having a real lane and you actually enjoy the the quality of being a designer where you're sort of responding to whatever problems that come your way. So this talk I think is really helpful, hopefully, I hope that it's helpful for students, especially to think about ways that you can do work today as an academic and ways that hopefully professional practice can do public work and do public engagement. So the title is Transformative Design in the Landscape of Rural Density, University Supported Engagement in a Suburban, but I've fancily hyphenated suburban, and I'll talk about that, Pennsylvania borough. That's the kind of scholary's title. And that's one theme. I want to talk about the place where I did this work and why I think it's significant and a really good fit for academia. And then how I learned to be helpful is more about like how I went about this and what I learned about doing a certain kind of public engagement work. So I start with this slide because this is a great juxtaposition of a very mundane image. This is Williamsburg, Pennsylvania, combination mayor's office, police chief's office, fire station, borough building. And so you get a sense of the size of this town. It's a tiny town where all these things are combined. And so very like mundane setting, but really a source of major pride for me to see this image because the result, which I'll come to, is that through my work with this town, I kind of became a member of, in some ways, of the community by joining borough committees and really being involved in the life of this place. And I think that's the greatest aspiration that you can have if you have time in doing public engagement work. So what is Williamsburg, Pennsylvania? Well, you might be familiar with the one on the left. Not that one. And it's not this one either. It's not the hipster Brooklyn. Well, Williamsburg. It's this one. Um, this is Williamsburg, Pennsylvania, and you can see we actually share a lot of qualities in our geography. I think Virginia Tech and Penn State. So we're close to the boundary between this is the Appalachian Plateau and this is the Ridge and Valley region. And so our towns around here, and this is what Sean and I have been talking about a lot recently, are really their identity is connected to how they're situated in their valley. So that's really our unit of geography around here is what valley you're in. So Happy Valley or Nittany Valley, which is the more proper term, is up here. State College, that's where Penn State is. This is called Morrison's Cove. It's another large valley. And then here's this tiny town of Williamsburg. And you can really see also from this image, so this is oriented true north, that you can imagine the challenges of moving across this landscape in earlier centuries and moving people and goods. And so a lot of the towns, and Williamsburg is no exception, have this history that's closely connected to canals, railroads, and innovation in moving goods and people across a really challenging landscape. So this is an aerial of Williamsburg, and you get a sense of the scale of the town. And this presentation doesn't have a lot of scenic photos. I should probably add more, but you also get a sense of how it's nestled into a kind of scenic landscape and how connected it is. This is the Frankstown branch of the Juniata River, one of the major rivers around here. How connected it is to its natural systems. So the form of the town, you can sort of tell there are mountains rising up on either side. Is really, really connected to its environment. And this Frankstown branch of the Juniata was supported a canal, which later became a major railroad system that connected across Pennsylvania from east to west. So that's all part of this town's legacy. I'm going to talk less about the actual content of what's interesting about the town and what I discovered, and more about the process. So if anybody is curious about any of those things, just ask me. I'm going to come back to this slide. This is a map of all the municipalities of Pennsylvania, and there's unusually large number of government units in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We're also a Commonwealth. And there's Williamsburg right there. So we have counties, obviously, and boroughs and townships and all these units, and they each have their own kind of government system. And so there's some challenges, but some real opportunities there for designers and public engagement. So this is taking the form of kind of a timeline and a story of how I got involved with this community. And the prologue here is that actually the first encounter I had with Williamsburg was when I was doing a bike ride, a kind of ambitious, foolhardy bike ride from State College to Pittsburgh to meet up with my family to do the Great Allegheny Passage, if anybody knows that rail trail. And going across this really challenging landscape and being really grateful that there was a really nice rail trail for at least one leg of it. And it just so happens, this is the Lauer Trail, that goes right through Williamsburg. So I had this experience of the town and I just kind of blew right through it. But I was really glad to have that story. Number one, just because I have at this, I don't know, kind of deep level, I understand how you might encounter this town via this trail, which is a really important part of how they're thinking of developing their town and their economy. But also, I just had a story to tell to the people when I came there, and it was a little more personal than just I'm doing this work or I'm coming to tell you what to do. So if there's a takeaway from that, I think just getting out in the world and biking is great if you like that, but just seeing places and trying to have embodied personal experiences of different kinds of places, especially in your own backyard, it really equips you well to do design work and to interact with people. But getting to the real meat of the project, so this is early 2021, I was in contact with a group called the Sustainable Communities Collaborative through my studios. That's located in Penn State Sustainability Institute, whose job it is to connect Penn State professors and institutions with communities that could use their services. And I've gotten to know this person, Ilona Balric, pretty well, and at a really interesting time where she's started to explore ways to get the design fields more involved in this kind of work. So typically, she'll get, we have strong sciences and a really good extension that deals with agricultural stuff. And so we're really good on hooking up communities with research that can be useful and just technical knowledge. It's a little harder and less obvious how designers can be connected with communities and less common, although I mean, I think it's not a surprise to us that we can be really helpful. So this organization is getting really into connecting designers with communities more and exploring what they can provide. And so I've been happy and lucky to be part of that, both through my studios and through this work. And really what this was is it's as simple as, this is basically an office of one, this one woman, Ilona Balric, who knows people in the area. And she reached out to our department and with this brain dump of things that the community was trying to accomplish, kind of shopping around for people that might want to help. And she didn't have a sense specifically of what the role of that person would be, and that was all to be figured out. But basically, she had talked to the government of Williamsburg, and they're at this moment where they just purchased this large, the 50-acre parcel of land. And I'm showing you exactly the materials that I received, so kind of like a whole mess of things. They had just bought this 50-acre parcel of post-industrial land with a really interesting industrial history that's actually adjacent to the town from the township next door. You can see that, so here they've got this land that's largely in the floodplain of the river. It's got a massive, you can see this better in other photos, ash dump, which is inert, non-toxic, and basically has a forest growing on it. And then here's the Lauer Trail going through here. And so they have, the mayor and other community leaders have recognized that trails, especially rail to trails, have been huge economic drivers in other parts of Pennsylvania, including, as I mentioned, the Great Allegheny Passage, which connects Cumberland to Pittsburgh, and then from Cumberland that via the C&O Rail Trail connects to DC. Hugely popular trail system that's helped a lot of the small towns. So they are basically thinking like we're struggling from all of the kind of economic factors that small rural towns are struggling from, the loss of industry, loss of population, and we've seen how this has helped other towns. Let's see if we can do the same thing with the Lauer Trail, which is a popular trail and will become part of the 9/11 trail when that's completed. So can we use this parcel of land to jumpstart, that kind of tourist economy, but also asking the questions like, how can it help benefit our local residents as well? And what do we want this to be before we commit to something? And so I agreed that was a great role for somebody working through Penn State. And it just seemed like a fun thing for me. As I said, I like to bike. I mean, this is right up my alley. And so around this time, and these institutions within universities are a theme here that I'll come back to. There's another institution called the Hamer Center, which is a Center for Community Design, located in our design school, in the Stuckman School, which has a similar mission to the Sustainable Communities Collaborative, specifically for design. And so they have this internal grant program, and that lined up with the work that I wanted to do to help out this community. So I applied for the grant, $10,000, which depending on where you are in academia is either a lot or a tiny amount for a grant, but for an internal grant, it's pretty good. And I got the response back that we don't know what your research question is. We don't know what your methodology and pretty harsh criticism in that vein. But here's the money anyway. Was basically the response they gave, which made me feel really good because I thought, well, that's good. I don't think there should be a research question for this yet, or exactly a methodology, because I haven't really met with this community yet. I don't know what they need, and so having some support to just engage with a group of people who have a vision that maybe they're not even sure what it is yet, but there's definite opportunities and challenges, I think is a really great thing for a land grant university to be involved in. So um, these two institutions, I'm really proud to have them at Penn State, and I hope through my work especially, it can be an example of how funding and supporting very open-ended work, especially in the design fields where open-endedness is critical, I would say, that's really important and sometimes easy to overlook in a place like Penn State, which is also a research one university where there are really strict guidelines about who gets money and what results you need from that. Um, so one of the ways that I measured progress here, and the thing that I think of as really the main activity for this project, was getting to know people and making connections. So in the grant application, I had to, with Alona's help, who was my liaison, make as good a guess as I could for who would be the main group of stakeholders. And so I laid out this short list of folks and made sure to get to know them. And then I just spent time there. So here, these aren't like the prettiest pictures necessarily, but these are some of the first impressions of my site. So going there on a rainy day, understanding how water moves to the site. Up in the upper right is um, the Big Spring, which is a spring that has a huge yield of excellent fresh water, which has made this town. It was basically the reason why this town exists in this place. So it was able to power mills and provide that economy, and it's been a subject of maybe further economic development, but right now it's just pouring out into the Frankstown branch. So there's interesting infrastructure still there. This is a historic building which is associated with the kind of the emergence of the spring as it goes through town. So interesting infrastructure. This is a bridge pier. Interestingly enough, not for a vehicular or pedestrian bridge, but a bridge that carried ash waste across the river from when there was a paper plant there. So really great, amazing layers of different history. And I just had a lot of appointments with people and calls. And honestly, these were very awkward meetings and conversations because I think that a lot of folks understandably expect when they meet with somebody from an institution like Penn State that person will have be able to say, well, this is what I think we're going to do. Here's how it's going to go. But we got past that pretty quickly. But I had to be in that space of discomfort where I had to say, well, I don't really know what my role is going to be, and I don't really know how this is going to work. I need to learn a lot. I don't know what this is yet, and I found that people were really understanding of that, and that it was a great way to make relationships because you realize that nobody quite knows, and people are happy to have that conversation. So one of my first thoughts was this is going to be a lot about visualization and representation, because what I didn't want to do and what Penn State is not allowed to do and shouldn't do is take away professional work from professional designers. So I'm not coming in here with a proposal for what should happen, but I did want to equip this community with visualizations, ways of seeing both what they had, what the existing conditions were, and what their ideas were up to this point, in a way that maybe they didn't have access to. So I did bunch of 360-degree imagery with the support of another institution, the Center for Immersive Environments at Penn State. And this helped me develop my work and just gave me a way to kind of like see the site when I wasn't there. And then also, it's a long story, so that it's kind of got installed, but I thought like, well, this could be anything that I'm doing could be something useful for the community engagement process. Also, a good thing about doing work with these institutions is they kind of push you along. So even if you're allowed to be open-ended, which is great, there are certain deliverables. So I have to make a poster for Research Open House, and people are kind of like checking in on you. So there was a really good amount of that without a lot of pressure. So starting to develop, here's a diagram that shows the how many major recreational trail routes converge on this town, which is really interesting and something that people might not realize. And then kind of just going through the town, even things as simple as like making a base plan, tracing buildings in CAD, doing that busy work, which I believe is not just busy work, but you're like drawing through the site, getting to know it, is really important. And I think people recognize that. And then these are all resources that people have access to. So early products, again, like checking in, I felt, as I said, a little uncomfortable with this project because I knew I had to like do it and spend the money and have something to show for it. So I gave myself structure and I said, like, these are deliverables that I'm gonna have. And I sent the email off and I told people I'm gonna do this, and then I had to do it. So I made myself a project brief. I said, by this time, I'm gonna define more what the project is, and I'm going to give myself an assignment and say what I expect to do. And this wasn't exactly required, but so just refining, it's a way of zeroing in on what this is actually about. And then it was something I could refer to as well. So one of the challenges with this, and I will say this is like a small scale funded project, and you may encounter this with all like university bureaucracy, is how you spend your money can sometimes be really tricky. I was expecting to get a graduate student assistant. That didn't work out with the way that they need to get their stipends and all this kind of stuff, even though it was in my application. I ended up with these two undergrads, but basically because we were all just figuring this out, and because I teach Foundation Studio, I just picked the two best students I knew, and I had them as my RAs. So all along, the cast of characters is growing. And this to me is a sign that like I'm kind of getting somewhere. And something to point out, a lot of the people, like for example, Cynthia Potter doesn't even have a description after her name. She's just someone, she's married to Greg Williams, who is important to talk to. And you only find that out through making connections, right? So it's not just the mayor, like you want to check these boxes, make sure the mayor's on board, but actually Greg and Cynthia and David Cadle, and some of these other people who don't have government positions, or are with like official design or planning institution, they end up being the people you talk to the most. So I kept going back to like, well, whatever this becomes, it's going to be about representing the place back to the community. And I had this kind of like anxiety about making sure I proved that I was worth having this grant, which I don't recommend you have that kind of anxiety. I hope to get over that, but it kept me moving on like, what are we going to do? How are we going to spend money? How can we be helpful? And all along, I thought making a gigantic model of the site and actually even the whole borough would be really cool. So I set Elliot to work on this, creating sections of the model. And then we had this great synergy where April Wheeland, the middle school math teacher, wanted to do an activity for her class. and there was a day of service that Williamsburg does. And by getting to know all these people, I knew this was coming up, and I realized, well, we could have the middle schoolers assemble the model. We had cut all the pieces with the laser cutter. And so we showed up with hundreds of pieces of chipboard and some instructions, and there's Elliot helping out. And shockingly, they did an amazing job, and they got it done way faster than I would have done, even with an equal number of adult designers, because they were just like went nuts and were spraying glue everywhere, and it was very stressful, but it was amazing. And so when I convened a public meeting to talk about ideas, again, like not really with an agenda, which was a little uncomfortable, but saying like, it seems like these are things we should talk about. Let's gather people together. I really felt like having things, so this gigantic plan of the site and our model, it gave me a sense of like, okay, I know I can contribute, I can kind of relax, and I'm bringing something to this that justifies my being here, even though I'm not a member of the community. And what was really great is I could introduce this model as something that the children of some of these people put together, and so they knew that even the creation of it came from their community. So there's that plan, and you can see the scale of it, just with some initial thoughts, but pretty neutral, pointing out things that people might want to annotate or note. And then, as you can see here, I was taking notes on the plan because I knew I would roll it up and bring it back and transcribe those. So I learned a lot from that meeting, just asking questions. And my other TA stepped in a little later and did a lot of great research. One of the things that I knew, and again, it's just, I mean, everything has a bias, I guess, but I didn't want to feel like I was telling people what to do or telling them what was important, but something that I suspected would be missing from the story, because it so often is the Indigenous history of this place. And I mean, people know a lot about the canal history and the infrastructure and the rails. Very little is known by anyone about the Indigenous people in this part of Pennsylvania, especially compared to like the Lenape that are on the East Coast. The original inhabitants it's pretty vague. So so I wanted to tell that story as well as I could, given the constraints of the project. And so Anne really got to work on that, and we thought about how we could present that story. And this is a place where there's a lot of the history between Europeans and Indigenous people is often not that happy, and Pennsylvania is not super great about that stuff. So just like laying it out there, telling the story, I thought was really important. And by this time, I was developing this idea of compiling all this information into a resource, like a printed resource that people could have. So I'm thinking about, and by this point, I had the idea for a workbook, which I'll show you. I actually have one over here. And that's something that residents would have and stakeholders would have before any designers, professional designers, were engaged in anything having to do with this town, so that they could just have a common frame of reference to talk about things, to visualize things. And so they were just equipped with knowledge that it's not as if they lack that knowledge, but just a single location where they can represent that to other people, and it streamlines that process and gives people then the authority to interact with designers who think this way through drawings and so on. I also put Anne to work laser cutting and assembling every building in the borough. So we did that. And I love this stuff where it's like, why would you spend time doing it? There's probably a more efficient way to do it. Is this a good use of the money? But I think it really is, because it trains people to see the place. And then that level of attention and work pays huge dividends in the trust that you can gain in the community. So like, you're actually making a little wooden block that represents somebody's house who's looking at the model. And if you get it wrong or something, can have that conversation and then fix it. And that's a really amazing moment when stuff like that happens. So at this time, I'm making the early workbook drafts, kind of noting out what it's going to be, how I'm going to lay it out. And then here's where a major turning point, where another one of these guys who I wouldn't necessarily know would be important to the project, Mike Biddle, who's a hometown guy who went to Penn State and then returned home to do good work there. He started a coffee shop, but he also founded this development group, took it upon themselves to apply for a Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources grant to get a master plan design for this site, this 50-acre site that they bought. And so I didn't do this. I didn't even suggest doing this. This is something that these people have the wherewithal to do already. But Mike was really excited about getting me on board to be part of this right away. And so in addition to like these products that I was making to then show Penn State that I was doing something worthwhile, I realized like, great, like this is a really concrete thing that I can help with, even though I didn't know this was coming down the line. I'm in a really good position to be part of that. Thinking about the workbook, going back to my experience at MBVA, this is from their Waller Creek Framework Plan. This is a big project in Austin, Texas. And that was always my inspiration because I had seen that work. It was so thorough. And it was about cataloging existing conditions and reading through the site and showing it back to people and confirming. But it was also the process of doing it was really important. So people actually had to go into, in that case, the Waller Creek to take measurements and do drawings. And they were had a much bigger budget, so they involved a lot of people and ecologists and lots of different professions. I was on my own doing this, but still, it was a great way to spend time on the site. I talked to people as I was doing it. I met little kids who liked to ride the pipe that the spring goes through out to the river as a water slide, things that I wouldn't know otherwise. So moving through the site with these rough sections that were done with just USGS contours, amending them. And then I was able to do an advanced studio, and this isn't normally my wheelhouse at Penn State, but I did double duty and actually taught 2 studios. And so we had 8 students who were working on design proposals for Williamsburg. And this is another great thing about doing this kind of community engagement as an academic is, as a professional, I'm hesitant to go into a community and say, like, this is what I think you should do. For one thing, it's a little arrogant, and also you have to be careful, like I said, about taking work away from professionals. But to send students into a community and say this is their studio and they're working, it's part of their education, that really like kind of disarms people, and you can have conversations where people are much more on an even playing field, and institutions like Penn State, and I'm sure Virginia Tech in its own way, they're so beloved in their regions that people really welcome this kind of interaction, and having students propose something, it just is a totally different conversation than having a professional. But I really wanted the students to have a similar experience to me, to like kind of get to know the place before they started trying to do things or make proposals. So I made sure that their first experience was really positive. So this town it's a pretty little town, but it can be a little depressing. Like there's clearly not a lot going on economically, and if you drive through it, chances are you're going to think like this place isn't that great unless you spend enough time in it to recognize that it has a lot of good things about it. So I made sure that they got out there when something cool was happening. They do a big farm show. I had them, basically they just drove themselves out there. I wasn't even with them. They had their own experience. And then another nice convergence, this is Roan Lytle, he's the librarian. We figured out that he wanted to have the model as like the exhibit at the farm show to the library. And we said, well, we have all these buildings that we made. We haven't gotten around to placing them yet. This could be an activity at the farm show. Like people can actually find their house and find the like coded little square and place it in the model. And I think that was really fun for people. So students went through and one of the kind of low hanging fruit was signage for the trail and something that connects the trail to the town. So I had them do creative signage projects. Here, this is Dave Cadle, that's Mike Biddle. We spent a lot of time in the town. I think we went there at least 8 times. The student did a great project. This is a fly fishing fly library. It's like a little library that you see in neighborhoods, except it's for flies, where you can take a fly, leave a fly. Fishing is huge here. That was actually built in my father's township. They thought it was such a good idea. They did, you know, the typical stuff, charrettes, spent a lot of time just doing fun things. We ate a lot. So Flower Trail Creamery opened up just for us, even though it was out of season. Tried, if anything was open, we would try to eat there. Just spent time on the trail. Here's Greg Williams. Cynthia's out of frame, but he does a lot of volunteer tree planting along the trail. So we went out and just did it with him. No particular agenda. It was just a great way to get them connected. Here's them presenting their, basically this is a mid-review at the library, so they can get feedback directly from community members. This is an interesting one. Andrew here was able to do a solar analysis on the ash pile that I talked about earlier. And he's recognizing that there's like really good solar exposure on one side. So maybe you could build a solar field on the ash pile. And one of the really proud moments there was, and other people had ideas for creative use of that pile. The mayor really wants to just get rid of it because he remembers when it didn't exist, and he's nostalgic for that time. And to him, it feels like, you know, a bad thing. It's a pile of ash. For people who are just new to this town, it looks like a kind of scrappy, vegetated, forested hill. So they were able to see it with a new set of eyes and propose things like recreational trails, a way to get up high and get a view of the town, and even this idea about solar collectors, which is really interesting for this place because there's actually a transformer station existing right next door that you could plug it right into. And so we had a moment where the mayor actually said, well, maybe I'll reconsider, think more about that ash hill. And that may or may not be the right choice, but for him to be like, as someone who's lived there his whole life, to see value in something that somebody who's new to the community brings, that I was really proud of that. Some of the research that became really important came from that library visit because I'd been struggling to figure out things that I was seeing on site and from the aerials and from historic map scenarios that I didn't understand because it was these industrial remnants that aren't well documented. And Roan, the librarian, said, well, we have these yearbooks that the towns used to make on big anniversaries, the anniversary of the founding of the town or the bicentennial of the country. And so they would just print all this information and there'd be these great pictures and stories from, in this case, 1965. So, you know, still many things that you can only access in person. And then I took these yearbooks and I said, well, I need to give them back. So I'm going to scan them all. I scanned the whole thing. So now they do have a digital copy of them. And that was just something that it just made sense. And that was a contribution that I was able to make. Other actors here, this is Kathy McCullum she's actually involved in the media element of the Great Allegheny Passage. And so we attended one of her events in Williamsburg, a trail walking tour and assessment. And this was also really gratifying because I think Kathy does good work, but we got there and we found that we were kind of like ahead of her already. She was doing this event, which she does normally for communities who are really new to thinking about trail development. But the students, and I think the community members too, are kind of like already a few steps ahead of that. And then we came back for a final review in the studio. This is Alec presenting his work. They were allowed to take on that 50-acre parcel, but they could also think about other facets of the town. Flooding, as you can imagine, is a consideration here. So he was thinking about managing flooding and kind of redesigning a park system. And one of the really interesting things is like he figured out a way to reorient the historic, reorient the Lauer Trail away from the floodplain. And he could make the argument that it was actually a better place because this is historically the alignment of the canal and the canal towpath. It didn't go along the river. So, and this is an existing street. So it was this great synthetic synthesis design moment that I think people responded really well to. Here's that's solar study. This is a rendering on the Ash Hill. So thinking about what the views that you could get. And then, yeah, this cast of characters just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And I have a big spreadsheet of this. And then here's I can show, I don't know if people can see my little square, but this is it's an 11 by 17 workbook, printed, spiral bound. I have, I think probably still 100 or so copies of this left. So the idea, and this is part of how I spent my money for the grant, get a ton of these printed and just give them to people, like give a bunch to the library so that they have them for this process, which I now realized would be this master planning process. When they got bidders, when they eventually got a consultant to do this master plan, they would have this resource, the consultants would have the resource, and they could all be on the same page and talk about things. So this is an example of one of the master plans that gets developed using this grant typically. And this one is fine. I have this vision of like, maybe it could be even more, like with some of this analysis already done, with some of the community engagement already done, that the consultant could get even further and that the community could have a higher standard. Not dissing this plan at all. I don't know a lot of what's going on here, but that you could do even more bold things and look beyond the boundary of the given site and think about how it integrates with the town. And so I'm hoping that happens. These are some of the pages of the book. So thematically looking at things, history and culture, mapping out. This is this amazing, the footprint of an old paper mill. So I said there was all these interesting layers of industrial history in this parcel, most of them totally erased, but knowing where things used to be is really cool. Also like the old canal infrastructure. Thinking about resilience and flooding, there's the floodplain. And then these serial sections that I mentioned before that were inspired by the Waller Creek work. So I'm kind of yet to have test this really, hopefully soon to see. I know that like section drawings especially are not intuitive for a lot of non-designers, but to see how helpful this resource is. But I'm excited to see that. I think at minimum, it provides a lot of really good base material to get the consultants that we now actually have a bidder who's going to be accepted for the project, that they'll have a huge head start. And it just so happens that they're a local group anyway, so they do know the site, and they actually contributed already to the information that's in the workbook. So it's a nice synergy there. And then this is really cool. I've been talking about proud moments, and I know I'm wrapping up here. I'm almost at 45 minutes. But this is the RFP, the request for proposal document for this consultant that would be awarded this project with support from the DCNR grant. And here I'm written into the requirements of the RFP. Like, you have to talk to me if you get this project. And I've created these resources, and at least one meeting with Mr. Spangler is required. So that's really exciting for me. And I think a really good way for me to be involved, and I think maybe a good model for academics, like I was saying. So back to this slide, 2,564 local government units in Pennsylvania. I wonder what the comparison is in Virginia, but I know it's unusual, an unusual density of of distinct government units for a state. And then a lot of these areas are considered rural, even though they're structured like cities. So there's a low absolute population, low density in surrounding areas. So Williamsburg, you saw this image, it's a little dense town. Like it actually has high density in one sense, but it's also a rural place. So this is really good opportunity, I think, for, I'll just go to the last slide here, for academics working, and I think Sean and I have kind of talked about this. Big institutions like ours with fancy landscape architecture departments, we're often drawn still to like big East Coast cities and where a lot of the money is. But these smaller overlooked communities in our own backyard, not only are they deserving of good design like everybody else, but they're a really, really good match, I think, for studios and for community engagement research by faculty. Number one, they need it. They often don't have resources for design, or if they're hiring people for pre-design work, to have a real voice in that process. They're small enough that you can actually make real progress even with one semester. Stakeholder groups are small enough that you can engage meaningfully. So like you can meet everybody in this town pretty much. And then just going back to this image, like natural and infrastructural systems, right? There, you can take on the whole thing. Like it's not like a little piece of the waterfront. It's the whole waterfront. It's the entire social system, the entire town. And that's a really exciting opportunity for landscape architects that we rarely get when we're working in like a very parcelized way in a large city. And it can be totally transformative for the community. At least that's what I've found. And so then the other component to this is I really have come to believe that universities and institutions, especially if they're supporting design programs, they really have to be willing to support this open-ended research and creative activity and engagement, because you can't do this kind of work if you're pressured to know exactly what the products are before you start, and held to that. You have to be adaptable, and you have to be able to take a lot of time. And so these are the main lessons, and I think hopefully this project is interesting in terms of the content, but also the structure. So that's it.
Questions? Surely.
I don't have a question so much as a comment. Alec, this is Terry Clements. I met you a couple weeks ago.
Oh, hi.
All of our students are required to participate in a number of community engagement projects. And what I appreciate about your presentation, if you're showing all of the stuff that's behind the green curtain, sorry, my Wizard of Oz reference. What goes behind a lot of the work that we have you as students kind of do with us and for the communities is very much based within the framework of what Alec has talked about. And as faculty, we deal with it in different ways, but what we really are trying to do is to help you kind of learn those skills, but also to help the communities see other possibilities, and to make what they're already seeing very visible to others around them. So I appreciate that you share all of that work behind the curtain, because I think for the faculty in the room, it's actually very helpful too. So thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I wish that it would have been nice. I'm so grateful, like I said, to have had the support to do this, but talking to somebody who had done a similar project with as little knowledge of how it would turn out would have been really helpful, and put my mind at ease a little bit before doing this.
I don't know if any of you have any questions that kind of take your own experience with doing community engagement and pose it back to Alec for maybe some comments or just some observations.
Surely.
I have a question. So did you only have 2 student TAs the whole time?
Yes, and they were sequential. So I had one, and then he had to go abroad for a semester abroad, and then the other one took over. Yeah, so I did a lot myself, which for me is it's hard to get over that. Like I'm horrible at delegating, and I'm pretty bad at using my TAs, and yeah, so I don't know that's just the truth. I'll just say that, but yeah, they were amazing helpers, and I think it was a good experience for them. I think if this is part of your question, like for me, the next step in kind of figuring out how to do this work is how to lead, I guess, more of a team in a way that feels good for everybody, and so that I like the busy work. I really do believe that like getting in there and actually doing it and spending like a whole day walking up and down the trails is really important. But if that's the only mode that you can work in, then it limits what can get done. But yeah, is there another reason you're asking that question?
Yeah, you kind of touched to it, but I was wondering if you ever thought about increasing the student engagement with these projects, especially being so close to Penn State.
Yeah, for sure. So right now, a point that I ended up making it when I presented a similar talk before is I like the fact that this project, like I didn't need that much money. The funding was pretty low. But at the other side of that is like the project can kind of move at the pace of like my role in the project can move at the pace of what the community needs, which is often kind of slow and plodding along and inconsistent. So I'm only saying that to say like right now, we're sort of in a pause moment where I've been able to serve on this committee to manage the RFP and then actually to interact with the consultant. And I don't really need anybody to do any work right now, so I wouldn't want to be responsible for TAs that need something to do. But then later, that might ramp up, and there might be an opportunity to bring somebody in. So I would want it to be responsive like that, and I think that's again like a reason why, especially the Hamer Center. And I just had a conversation with the director, and she was totally on the same page about that. Why it's really important that they're super flexible and that they can like they are able to like hire students really quickly and roll with what the projects need and ramp up and maybe even have people like kind of on staff that can change gears really quickly. But yeah, like I would for sure, I would love to do another studio. So in a sense, we had like eight people working on it, but it was also their studio. But yeah, if the project demands it and it becomes something where a lot of people could help it, I for sure would.
My question's kind of complicated. If you were gonna do this again and you didn't know the place that you were going to, like I know you mentioned the bike story, and so you kind of had this like little anecdote of you had been there before and experienced it in some way. If like say one of us was going to be going to a new place to do this kind of community engagement effort, do you think it would be beneficial to go and visit the place first as like a completely unrelated part of the process? I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I like that question a lot. And I think for me, yes, like I guess everybody is different, but I like to go, like if I know, in this case, it was just chance, but like if I know I'm going to be involved in a place, I like to go and make sure I have some time before I actually meet somebody and just like approach it like I'm taking a vacation. Like, what would I want to do here? Like, what's the good food here? And maybe do some research ahead of time, or just ask people, or what is this place known for? If it was Williamsburg, in my case, I might like ride the trail just because I want to. And so I think for me, I would have a hard time working in a place where there was nothing there that appealed to me at all. So I want to find those things, not because like what I like is the most important, but like you say, to have a personal story, or to even to just have questions before you talk to somebody. I feel more comfortable, but that doesn't mean it's the right way to do. Some people express their humility by not going first and meeting somebody and saying like, I'm in your hands now, please tell me what I should see. But yeah, I like having, if I can, having that personal experience first, because it helps start the conversation. I sort of learned that lesson through working at MVVA, because I think that was part of their philosophy. And one principal in particular, Gulliver Shepherd, was known in the office as like, he would just always want to have so much fun in the cities where he was working. Like his first thing before he researched anything about the project was like, what's the best bar? Where's the best food? What are the coolest things? And I was on a project with him in Chicago, and it was on the North Branch of the Chicago River. And he just got it in his mind, like, I really want the first time we see this site to be from the river. And just so we can like, and I think sort of like what you're saying, like, so you have that story, and also because the view from the river, he thought it would like reorient our approach to the project beyond what would typically be done. And so we went through this whole thing where we met his friend and we borrowed a kayak, and it was March and we got lucky that it was kind of a warm day, but he sent me off in a kayak on the Chicago River. There wasn't enough room for both of us, with a GoPro camera, and I didn't know where I was going to be able to like disembark, and it was an adventure. And so like I still tell that story, and we were able to tell that to the clients, and it was kind of funny, and it allowed us to say, like, because we did something weird, we were able to say like, well, these are things we noticed that you may not have noticed, and nobody felt like we were being presumptuous, because it's like, well, yeah, they haven't done that, and we did, and yeah, it gave us like gets you talking, and that's the most important thing, whatever you can do to do that, I think.
Awesome, thank you.
Last questions, comments? Let's give Alec a big old round of applause and thank you.
That's really good ambient noise cancellation. I didn't hear any applause. It just went. Zoom technology is amazing. Well, thank you all. It's really fun to be able to present this.
Thank you, Alec. Really appreciate it. And we'll catch up in a couple of weeks or so. We can figure out our stuff as well.
Yeah, totally. Looking forward to it.
All right.
Have a good weekend, everyone.